Hey guys, this is Savannah from earthandwater.co, and today I'm here with Dr. Dana Saperstein, PhD. We're going to talk about hypnotherapy, which is something that I've dabbled in a little bit. I have a friend who became certified in hypnotherapy a couple of years ago, and she credited me for some reason. Well, I sent her the information. I was like, "Hey, look what I found." And she went from there and got her certification, which means that she gave me the honor of being her guinea pig while she was in school.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's the background that I have with it. So I've done a few sessions and we've tried to cover anxiety stuff and pain relief stuff and the personal purpose type stuff. There's a whole world of things that you can do with hypnotherapy.
That's definitely true.
How did you get started on all of this? Was this something that you always wanted to go into?
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and maybe 5 years into my practice. When my father was alive, he was always quite overweight and always trying to figure out a way to lose weight. And he was a fan of therapy, and so I said to him that he should consider maybe trying doing some hypnosis to see if it will help him lose weight, which was a lifetime struggle that he was never able to overcome. So I referred him to a rather famous hypnotherapist in Los Angeles. And he started to see the guy, and he called me up after a month or two, and he said, "Hey, you got to check out this process. I think it would be really good for you to, have as part of your practice." So he actually sponsored every other week a year of visits for me to drive from where I live up in Santa Barbara down to Malibu to learn from this fellow. And I found it really fascinating. And like you, I was a subject of, of being hypnotized, and I found it to be fairly remarkable. And then I started to incorporate it into my practice at that point.
Super cool. Yeah, a lot of people get really hung up on the woo-woo side of hypnotherapy and
Yeah.
whatnot. And for those people, I like to tell them that it doesn't necessarily have to be anything otherworldly if that's not what you believe. It's exploring your own subconscious.
Right. Well, I specialize in working with people that have been pretty severely traumatized in the course of their childhood. So I don't use it for habit control or people's particular symptoms. It's more to help people come to terms with the trauma that they suffer. It's the most effective way that I've found to help people release the feelings and the intensity of having been traumatized as a child. So it's kind of a narrow slice of the hypnosis pie,
Right, because there's tons and tons and tons of things that you can do with it.
right? Well, when I first got started, it was quite controversial because people were believing that the therapists were implanting false memories in people. And so it got a pretty bad name. And some people were using hypnosis as a tool to win custody of their children in divorces by claiming that, under hypnosis, they remembered their own abuse or their children's abuse or whatever it might be. Um, so it kind of got shelved professionally for a while, not by me, but by most other people. So in my community, I'm one of the few people that actually uses hypnotherapy for trauma. Most people do now. They do EMDR. I don't know if you're familiar with that process, but I stuck with hypnosis because I've done it for a million years and I find it to be really effective.
Yeah, my friend who does it, she's probably one of two or three in our entire geographic area.
Right. What I try to help people understand is that when you're being traumatized, you go into an altered state just to cope with the trauma. And it's an automatic process that we all go through when we're having to deal with something that's beyond our ability to handle. So hypnosis is like a deliberate recreation of the electrical chemical state that you go into when you're coping with trauma. And I've developed ways to help people actually connect with the feelings associated with those experiences, because when you're being traumatized, you don't feel what's happening. You're too busy surviving what's taking place. So the reason that people get post-traumatic stress is because the feelings associated with the trauma get buried inside of their body. So part of my job is to help people connect with those feelings and then release them from their body so that the trauma is no longer a reference point in their lives. It's quite effective.
That's
Not
beautiful.
always fun,
Yeah,
especially, the stuff that I deal with people.
I could imagine. So a lot of people shy away from trauma work. Like,
Well,
so much so that they go out of their way to be like, "Oh, I'm a therapist, or I'm a counselor, or I'm a hypnotherapist, or I'm a insert whatever they are, and I
right.
help people with this and that and that. I don't touch trauma." Like, they put that in their pitch.
That's the opposite of me. I specialize in it and I love it. I love working with people because I'm not overwhelmed by people's pain or their experiences. I feel a little bit sad when people describe the worst things that you could ever imagine happening to a child, but I feel like I was sort of born to be a trauma specialist. And so I take it as a compliment when people feel comfortable enough to bare their soul in my presence. And uh, when I go to Costco, they always say to me, "Oh, it's Dr. Kleenex," because I got more Kleenex than you could ever imagine. Because, part of dealing with trauma is crying intensely. So,
Sure.
and I've done a lot of hypnosis on myself also. It's not just useful for healing trauma, it's also helpful to come up with solutions to creative problems. And I find it to be useful in that, personally, in that part of doing hypnosis also.
Yeah, because it's just a deeper form of meditation, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of different ways that people can access their unconscious mind. And I'm sure meditation is one of those. I just find that hypnosis is a real simple procedure. And most people don't realize they've been hypnotized many times in their life. I'm sure you've had the experience of driving your car by yourself for a long distance and kind of looking around, well, how did I get here?
Mhm.
Because the monotony of driving puts you in a trance. That's called highway hypnosis, and it doesn't stop you from being aware of what's happening around you, but it is definitely an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah, a lot of the fear around these types of things just comes from the misunderstanding.
Well, and people have good reason to be afraid because it's a choice to deal with the deeper issues that we all carry. And it's certainly not a pleasant experience. And I think it does take an enormous amount of courage to go as deeply as you need to within yourself in order to really resolve these things. Most therapy is focused on helping people resolve their symptoms. But my notion is that your symptoms are a way of communicating to me something on a deeper level. And so I don't spend a ton of time trying to help people manage their symptoms. I think it's more important to come to terms with what's generating those symptoms in the first place.
Right, because it's all energy stuck in the body. And
Right. Yes, absolutely.
what we're learning is that, which is something that many have known for a long time now. It's just now the science is catching up with it. Most all pain or illness or disease or whatever ailments causing problems in your life, not only physically and mentally, but also like financially and professionally. There's all sorts of things. Most of them are deeply rooted as emotions from situations that happened.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. We're on the same page as far as that goes. I think that some statistics are important for people to sort of understand. Based on my experience, about 7 out of 10 women and about 6 out of 10 men experience some kind of sexual contact as a child. So that's a really horrible thing to think about. And that's just the sexual part of things. There's also tons of physical abuse and emotional abuse and a lot of neglect. Lots of people suffer from emotional neglect, and hypnosis works in resolving most of those traumas.
Yeah, and it is uncomfortable because in order to resolve them, you have to bring them to the surface, and
Yes,
they hurt on the surface.
that's for sure. A lot of people, when they do hypnosis, they have a little bit of skepticism about what they remember, whether it's real or not,
Mm.
because the experiences can be very vivid and really overwhelming in the moment. Um, but sometimes things come up that people don't consciously remember,
Mhm.
and that can be buried inside your body for a long time. I was molested as a 4-year-old, and I was threatened with death when I in the environment that I was in, and I buried that trauma until I was in my 30s. And hypnosis was part of what helped me remember that that happened to me, and it stayed in my body for 30 years without me having any awareness at all.
Mm.
And this was having tons. I had tons of therapy, but never. It never came sort of to light that there could be sexual abuse in my background. So sometimes surprising things do happen.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to dig deep in there sometimes.
Yeah.
How do we differentiate between like can false memories come up?
Well, what I ask people to consider is that the content of what it is you remember may not be 100% accurate, but your feelings associated with those memories are way more important than the actual visual memories that you get. Because people do experience some strange phenomenon. Like, I was doing hypnosis with a fellow for the first time the other day, and he said, I feel like I'm floating, and then my arms are really big. And obviously that wasn't happening, but that was his perception of what was happening with his body. Um, but the feelings that came up had to do with him being abandoned by his dad, and what it was like to grow up as a child without a father, and how painful that was. And those feelings were very accurate and quite helpful for him to come to terms with. So that's just kind of an example.
Do you do any past life regression?
When I first started doing hypnosis, people started having past life regressions spontaneously in my office. And I didn't know what it was at the time. And it really scared me because the first woman that it happened with, started describing having her hands chopped off in this horrible memory from the like 1400s. I'm thinking either she or I have both completely lost our marbles, because I don't know how we got here. it was it was pretty scary to me because I really had no knowledge or experience of that as a something that could really happen. And then after a few weeks, about 4 or 5 different people started having memories of being in the same place and describing it from different points of view. And it was they all remembered being in a village in Central America when the Spanish came and destroyed the indigenous cultures. And it was pretty overwhelming. But somebody handed me a book during all of this called Many Lives, Many Masters. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was written by a guy who was a psychiatrist in Miami, I think. And he started having the same experience I did, having people do spontaneous, uh, regressions into past lives. And he capitalized on it and then started directing people in that direction who were not healing from normal, therapy, and found that it was quite helpful. I didn't necessarily pursue it because I feel like we got enough to deal with in this lifetime, let alone, you know, going back. So I kind of let it go after a year or so. Um, and it just stopped happening when I stopped sort of paying attention in that way. So it's not that I don't believe that that's possible. It's just that the things that people describe to me that they've experienced in this lifetime can fill up volumes of information. So I just don't see the need to go back unless somebody is not benefiting by dealing with what's happening in their current lifetime.
Right, because we can carry ancestral memories as well. So
Right.
that epigenetics, and it um things that happen to our grandparents can affect us now biologically and mentally. And
Right. I do think there is genetic memory that we carry from one generation to the next.
yeah, so we could look at it as is it actual past lives coming up, or is it just these genetic markers that something so traumatic happened to one of our ancestors that it got coded into our DNA and passed all the way down and is now affecting us even though it didn't even have anything to do with us.
I know that that's possible, but I will tell you, Savannah, that most of the people that come to see me, they know what I specialize in, and they bring in enough trauma from their current life that there's not often a need to go any further than that in order for them to heal.
That is absolutely true. We have done enough in this day and age to traumatize every single one of us.
That's for sure. And I've had my own experience of trauma, so I can understand what it takes, to get to it and to heal it.
Um, I see you have all of these things that you can help with: addiction, anxiety, depression, death. All of that stems from the same thing, though. It's trauma.
I believe that that's true. I absolutely agree with you. It's just that some people call me specifically to like stop smoking or some other habit like that, and I just don't have any particular interest in um, using hypnosis in that way. Plus, I'm busier than you could ever imagine, and so I just like keep doing the stuff that I like.
Yeah,
So
well,
I
go ahead.
no, please.
I was gonna say when you get really into this stuff, you find the patterns in it and it becomes simpler. So whereas the general population sees them as all separate problems,
Right.
the underlying, it's always the same.
Well, and the other thing that I know this is a bit off the subject that you're describing, but most people's knowledge of hypnosis comes from movies and stage shows.
Hmm.
And, we all know that everything is exaggerated in the media, obviously. So, and the stage shows, in my mind, are actually quite dangerous because the people that are most susceptible to stage hypnosis are the ones that carry the most trauma
Hmm.
because they have learned how to change their consciousness at will in order to survive. So a lot of the people that end up, coming up on stage and going through all the theatrics, they're left after that experience in a very, very exposed way. And I've known a number of people that have been really seriously harmed by the trauma that starts to bubble up inside of them once they sort of open up their unconscious. And they walk away from the show and then they start to suffer depression, anxiety, all kinds of other stuff, and don't really understand that they opened their door not just to being on stage and doing stupid things, but also to dealing with whatever it is that they carry inside their body. So I'm not a big fan of those hypnosis shows, even though they can be quite funny. I
I
think
agree
they're
completely. They can be really harmful for
yeah,
sure.
that's what I think. Um, but I'm a little biased because I think that you don't want to mess with your unconscious mind unless you're prepared to deal with what wants to come forward. Because I think we all have a template inside of us that dictates the healing process.
Mm.
When I do hypnosis with people, I ask them, do you have a specific destination that you want to go to? Or do you want to just see what comes up? I would say most people just want to see what comes up, and they're always surprised by the initial first memory that comes, because sometimes it seems very innocuous, but within a very short period of time, it leads to something very deeply emotionally painful. And I don't ever have to worry about where we're going to go because um, all of us have that healing template that we tap into, and it comes forward
Yeah, we're capable of healing ourselves if we just need a little guidance
with
sometimes.
some assistance. Yes,
Yeah. Do you
yeah.
give your clients a prescription per se of things to do to work through things after they leave your office, or do you do all the work with them in office?
I do most of it in my office. I tell people if they want to that they can use that hypnotic procedure when they're alone, but not necessarily with the idea of going into the trauma, but just to relax. And then there's some, books that I think are useful for people to read. I'm not a big fan of self-help books because a lot of them have a recipe attached to them that, sounds good, but doesn't really help a whole lot. Um, and I think for a lot of people, just doing it an hour a week is enough. Because a lot of times people leave here sobbing, and it can take hours to kind of, I tell everybody, don't plan an important meeting or anything that you need to tend to, um, when you leave here, because it can be pretty intense.
Right,
Um,
because just sitting with it is a lot of the work, letting
yeah.
it, feeling
Uh,
it, letting it run its route.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not magic. Nothing really is in that way, but I think it shortens therapy, the duration of therapy, sometimes by months, if not years, because, again, if you think about it, you go into a certain electrical chemical state when you're being traumatized, and hypnosis deliberately recreates that same electrical chemical state. So it gives you a direct line into whatever it is that uh, needs to come forward.
Yeah, from there, it's usually just about surrendering to it and
Mhm.
accepting it,
Yeah. Um,
integrating it.
the worst experience, people ask me, well, what's the worst thing that's ever happened? And there was one time when a woman, we were just going to start doing hypnosis, and as soon as she closed her eyes, she had a panic attack. Now, that wasn't from the hypnosis, that was from the anticipation of what might come up, and what she was overwhelmed with was memories of being sexually abused by her father that she didn't even know happened. And all she had to do was just sort of entertain the idea that we were going to go there. And all of this stuff came forward. And after a few minutes, she was able to relax, and we were able to continue the visit. But most of the time, the more a person does it, the more comfortable they come with it. And some people, I do it every time they come in. Other people, it's every other time. Some people just every once in a while. I always leave it up to my clients to decide how much time they want to spend doing hypnosis.
Yeah, I found that a lot of times to get through things and get to the other side of them, because you have to it's the process
Yeah,
of the processing. And you start it out, you drudge it all up. Most of the time, what you need most is the safe place and support of another individual, especially one that you respect and trust.
right. Well, if you think about it, Savannah, I think that everything that happens to us, or the neglect that we suffer, is always at the hands of another person.
Mm.
And so I figure that healing kind of balances things out because it happens in the hands of another person.
Yeah.
So, that may be a self-serving philosophy, but I believe it. Because I think it's so much easier to have courage if you don't feel like you're alone, especially in the face of things that happen that are kind of unspeakable.
You're right though. You're exactly right. So many of us, I would even go as far to say the vast majority of us have enormous trust issues because our trust was betrayed as a child by
Right,
someone who wasn't supposed to be, who was supposed to be a safe place for us.
right, right. Absolutely true. Yeah, there's no shortage of people that have been betrayed as children, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes purposefully, and other times just out of ignorance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I talk about a lot because people want to get it. People have a really hard time with the word forgiveness,
Right,
because it makes it sound like we're saying what they did. We're making excuses for the person that did wrong.
right,
And we're not, in the most circumstances, definitely not all, there are people who just choose really wrong things to do to people. But in most situations, everybody's doing the best that they have with the knowledge and experience and resources that they have. And
right,
they don't mean to hurt you or neglect you.
right.
It just happens.
Yeah, it just happens. That's true. You're absolutely right about that. Well, I would say half and half. Some parents are actually not good
Sure.
people, obviously,
Absolutely.
and they cause great harm for sure. Um, but a lot of times, it's not purposeful, especially with neglect, because I don't think a lot of parents really understand how to be present to themselves, let alone their children.
Yeah. I mean, even with the bad ones, though, more often than not, they themselves were traumatized. And
Oh,
you
without
feel
a
the
doubt.
same way.
Yeah, when I think about my own parents and what they went through, they were so ill-equipped to be parents. It's ridiculous.
Hmm.
And yet, they chose to become parents, and they did a fairly terrible job. um, I was lucky that my parents, in the late 60s, therapy became available sort of in a less negative way in terms of, being in an asylum or whatever it was. There was a lot of therapists in the Los Angeles area. So my parents actually realized that it was something that might benefit them. So they started therapy at a pretty early time in their lives, which is pretty amazing to me because they were a disaster. They were a mess.
That is amazing because even in, the 90s, I remember people talking down about therapy and
Right,
saying that
right.
therapy is for crazy people or people that are not right in the head and
Yeah.
all sorts.
This was in the late 60s, actually, to tell you the truth. Like,
Right. So it's huge that they did that.
yeah, yeah. It helped them to a degree. They ended up getting a divorce, and my dad started a new family with somebody else. So I actually have a half brother who's my children's age. Um, but what they recognized more than anything was that their son, me, was miserable, and so they said, maybe you should consider talking to somebody. And it was pretty much of a miracle for me.
That's beautiful though that they even noticed.
Oh, it was hard not to notice. When you got a 16 or 17-year-old this high every second of every of their life and really miserable, even as blind as they could have been, I think they noticed. It was
I
hard to see
some
because
people
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say some notice but don't want to notice, so they pretend they don't.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I'm lucky my parents actually, despite the fact that they were a disaster, they did care about their children. That's for sure. So I mean, the mentor that I had when I moved to Santa Barbara to finish college, I found a therapist here and I spent about a decade um, in really intense therapy. And he's the one that actually could convince me to become a therapist. And he had a really strong connection to, working with your unconscious. And he did a certain type of hypnosis that wasn't formal, but it was a way of telling stories to help me relax to a place where he could then, help me get to a place where I could stand the intensity of the stuff that I had to come to terms with.
Right. Because that's important. You have to be able to go there in the first place. Well,
Absolutely.
even calling you up and scheduling an appointment takes a whole lot of getting to that place of readiness.
That's true. I'm a very fortunate man in that the people I see are incredibly lovely people and very motivated to heal. So it gives me a lot of inspiration and a lot of hope because mostly what we're exposed to in our world is, all the negativity and all the fear and and people that are all doing all the bad things. And my life is filled with people that are working really hard to be good people and to heal. And some of that is geographic. I live in what's now been determined the fourth most expensive city in the world, uh, which is really crazy. I don't like it, but it means that there are tons of people that have like more money than you could ever imagine.
Hmm.
So it's easy for them to afford uh, to go to therapy, and that's a good thing. It
Yeah.
helps. It helps me become an elitist therapist. Actually, I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but I don't take insurance and I don't deal with most of the stuff that people have to in other communities because there's so much wealth here. But the wealth brings people who are really motivated to be better people. And a lot of times I see people after they've sold, a company for millions of dollars, and then they want to spend their lives being of service after that. And that's really inspiring to me because it's nice that instead of just wanting to accumulate more money, they actually want to help other people. And a
Yeah.
lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to let you talk as much as you want to talk.
Well, a lot of these people have done hypnosis with me because most people that come to see me know what to expect because they've been told by friends and family. Because I would say 98% of the referrals come from satisfied customers referring their friends and family. So they kind of have an idea of what to expect when they walk in the door. And people tease me. One person the other day said, you're an elbow therapist. I said, what the heck is that? And she said, well, when you get a massage and they use your elbow to try to break up some of the, he's seeing you is kind of like seeing an elbow massage therapist because I don't mess around. I want to help people get to where I'm sorry,
Okay.
to where they need to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you covered that how so many people that sell their companies for millions of dollars and then will turn around and want to help people, because that's a
Uh-huh.
big misconception about the rich, is that they're all stuck up and self-centered and think about nobody else. But just in doing the energy work and the studying vibration and frequency and all of that I do, I know that sure, you can totally get there being a terrible person,
Yeah.
and many have. But also, especially when you start at the bottom and work your way up to the top, you have to
Yes.
have a good heart, because uh, money
Me too.
rewards those who help others.
Yeah.
Value follows Money follows value. That's what the quote is, right? Money follows value.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm amazed at how kind-hearted people can become once they don't have to worry about their security anymore. Because a lot of people, especially, well, California is a fairly liberal place, at least where I live. So there's a lot of people that are very much interested in, the community around them and all that. But I'm always blown away when someone, sells their company for $100 million and then wants to actually start taking care of other people
Hmm.
because they've been so self-centered most of their life in order to get to that level of success. Um, so it gives me hope in the face of a lot of stuff that is kind of scary these days.
Yeah, because it generally is are you familiar with the chakra system?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it generally is stuff like that, has a lot of deep-rooted trauma in the root chakra, and that's why they work so hard, is because they
Yes.
come from a place of insecurity and the need to restabilize that.
Yeah. Well, and because I have suffered every kind of uh, trauma that you could imagine, and then some you probably wouldn't want to, rather than, except maybe physical abuse, I'm really familiar with what it feels like to live with trauma and what it takes in order to heal. And that makes a really big difference because my reference point doesn't come from books and school. It comes from personal experience. And I think that that is very reassuring to people that um, feel ashamed of themselves because, I mean, find me one person who doesn't believe they deserve whatever it is that happened to them. Because that's just the way all children are. They, including myself, I believe that whatever had happened, I caused it or did something to cause it. And, I tell people all the time, a lot of times it's like those people that now that we have DNA testing who claim to be innocent and they're in jail. And all
Hmm.
of a sudden we realize every once in a while somebody actually is innocent. And
Hmm.
all this time they've been punished and blamed for something that they had nothing to do with. And I think that has a lot in common with people that have been traumatized. They blame themselves, they develop all kinds of feelings of self loathing. And because, these things happen usually by caretakers.
Hmm.
There's a myth when it comes like for sexual abuse, as an example, that it's, some stranger that marches into your world, but about 90% of sexual abuse happens either from a teacher or a parent, or, I mean, I've worked with people that have been sexually abused by mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and grandparents and aunts. I mean, it's astounding um, uh, who's capable of being a perpetrator.
Hmm.
And there used to be a myth that it was only men, but I can tell you that's probably, at least with the people I see, 2/3 happens with men committing the perpetrator, but at least a third or more women. And that's kind of shocking to a lot of people that they could be sexually abused by a grandmother or an aunt or, teacher or whatever. But I just know it's real. So I do the best I can to help people come to terms with it. I have my own podcast, and I just I recorded an episode last week about how we learn to lie to ourselves,
Hmm.
because I think that when you're traumatized or you are neglected, you start your life lying to yourself about your lack of value and whose fault it is that um, you're suffering as much as you have. So I do the best I can to show people that as an old guy, because I'm 68, that it's possible to actually talk about things that are real and that it's really important not to walk around feeling ashamed of the things that happened to you because it's not your fault. And the other thing I think is really important is that you're not your trauma. It does not have to define who you are as a person. because a lot of people believe that when they suffer these kinds of traumas, that it's because of who they are and that they deserved it. So part of the healing process, and especially in doing hypnosis, is really being able to recognize that when you're being traumatized, you're being poisoned by the other person. And that you take that energy into your body and then you start to mistake it for your own.
Mhm.
Because when you're like sexual abuse, as an example, it's like being slimed by someone, and the energy comes into your body and really creates a feeling of self-hate and kind of dirtiness that doesn't belong to you. But because it's been there for so long, you begin to mistake it for being your own.
Mhm.
And so I think that hypnotherapy really helps people recognize that the poison is not theirs, and they can release it and let it go back to the person that harmed them. And that makes a very big difference in helping people heal and forgive themselves, and hopefully at some point, if they can, forgive the person that caused them harm.
Yeah. There's a lot of misconceptions about trauma because, not only the women perpetrators not being a thing, but uh, a lot of victims get blamed
Oh,
openly.
absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
have heard the worst things that a parent could ever utter to a child. It's just so beyond me that, sorry. uh, um, I was working with a woman last year whose father started raping her when she was 2. And the mom stayed with the dad, even though she knew that her husband was raping her 2 daughters. And now they're all adults. And the mom keeps saying to the daughter, "Why don't you come home? He doesn't do it anymore." She's still living with him. And she still really believes that the daughter's the problem for not forgiving her father, who's never taken responsibility. And I just think to myself, how do you sleep in the same bed with a man that raped your children?
Hmm.
And then try to convince your daughter that she's the one that's a problem.
Hmm.
And again, these are not like, uh, they're not stupid people. They're not like living in a trailer park somewhere, uneducated. I'm talking about people that are really, in a lot of ways, very well educated and successful, but are just incredibly ignorant, I guess, in their own psychology.
Ignorance the best word we can find, isn't it? It's
Well, it's the best one I can come up with because I'm astounded that people that are so well educated be so evil in their relationship with their children. Because somebody asked me the other day, how many parents, I've been in practice about 35 years, have come into your office with their children begging forgiveness for the things that they did to their children? And I would ask you, take a guess how many in probably thousands of people I've seen over the course of time.
I'd say none.
Well, I'm really glad to say to you that you're wrong, but not by much. Probably, it's probably maybe a dozen or so. I mean, luckily, every once in a while, somebody recognizes because they've had their own therapy or whatever it might be, that they have easily could have destroyed their children's lives and take responsibility for it. Um, I don't work with perpetrators, but I one time did with one woman. And the only reason I chose to work with her is because she was trying to figure out a way to get her children to understand how sorry she was and how bad she felt about herself for doing what she did to them. So that's why I agreed to work with her, because she was really, really desperate to find a way to be sorry and to make amends. But that is such a rare event, very rare event.
Yeah, because admitting that they are responsible m- makes things worse before it makes things better, for sure.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so much easier for parents to blame the kids. When
Mhm.
I told my mom that I got sexually abused when I remembered it, it happened in a hospital. I got dropped off as a 4.5-year-old to have surgery. And the orderly, he sexually abused me. He told me that if I told anybody, he would kill me. And he was wheeling me into the operating room the next morning. And when they were putting me under anesthesia, I thought they were killing me. So I remember going under screaming, "I won't tell, I won't tell." And so I erased that experience all the way till I was in my 30s. And when I remembered all of it because of hypnosis, I started to, talk to my mom and dad about it. And my mom, she wouldn't believe it. She said, "That could never have happened. I think you're making it up." And
Mhm.
that was so painful for
Mhm.
her to be unwilling to take responsibility. It wasn't her fault. I mean, back in those days, you did leave your kids in the hospital by themselves. They didn't encourage parents to to stay with their kids. This was 1959. There were still dinosaurs walking around back then. So um, I didn't blame either of my parents. The only thing that was puzzling to me is that there had to be a difference in my energy pre and post that experience, right? I couldn't have been the same person when they picked me up from the hospital.
Right.
But unfortunately, my parents were so preoccupied that they didn't notice.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my dad was a criminal, and so we had to flee. I was living in Canada. We had to leave the country because he was going to go to jail. So most of the uh, energy was going into surviving and having my dad stay out of jail.
Yeah, which is the story for so many.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not boring everybody with my story,
No.
but it does help for people to understand what you can heal.
Yeah,
That if
absolutely. You have to share your own stories and your own experiences so that
right,
people can be like, "Oh, that's similar to mine. I wonder if he could help me."
right, yes, yeah. Most therapists don't talk much about the things that happen to them.
You're right.
But I think it's useful for people to know that we are people
Yeah.
and that what determines our ability to be a good therapist is not just our training, but our understanding of what it takes to heal.
Right, because a lot of times it's historically been seen as unprofessional to talk
Yeah,
about, which has led a lot of professionals to absolutely not even pretend that they have a life outside of the office.
well, I do a fair bit of marriage counseling, and I'll ask you another question that you probably already know the answer to, but I would ask you to wonder how many people have asked me whether I'm capable of being in a relationship, whether I'm married myself, and how long, and whether whether there's anything about my life on a personal level that would qualify me besides my license to be to help them in their relationship.
Probably not many, yeah.
None.
None. Oh my god.
None. And
Yes, same.
I am stunned because I say to people, don't you have any questions, in our first visit? And most people say no. And I said, well, don't you wonder because I don't wear a wedding ring. I don't like rings, and luckily my wife doesn't care whether I wear a ring or not. But no, but so people don't know if I'm married or not, unless somebody's already told them. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but I'm shocked that nobody says, how many times you've been married, and how long you've been married, and are you capable of actually conducting a healthy relationship? I'm really lucky because I can tell them I've only been married once for 45 years to the same person who I still love. So maybe that's a self-serving question
Mhm.
because I get to brag about how much my wife and I, hopefully, I mean, I know how much I love her anyway. uh,
Mhm.
but why would you want to ask somebody to help you if you don't even know if they can do it themselves?
Mhm.
But I guess most people are taught to believe that a therapist is not going to tell them anything about themselves, which I think is really harmful.
Yeah.
Because, as you probably know, half the therapists that are practicing are completely insane themselves,
Oh man, I've been to a
right?
few.
I'm sure you know that's true,
I've been to a few that were no kind of help at
right?
all, for sure.
Some can be actually quite harmful. That's,
Yeah.
but anyway, we're getting off topic. Do you have any questions specifically about hypnotherapy that I might help clarify a bit more?
I think we've pretty well covered everything, really. I don't do well with coming up with things on the spot. I just
Oh, okay.
with whatever pops up in another moment, and then we stem off of
Well,
that.
is it okay if I say a few more things that I think are important?
Absolutely, please do.
Um, my heroes are the people that are willing to take a look at who they are deep down inside. And I tell people all the time who are really scared that I'm going to judge them or that somehow, because of how ashamed they are of themselves, that I'm going to see them the same way they see themselves, that it's exactly the opposite. If you sob in my presence, I'm not uncomfortable like a lot of men are with tears.
Mhm.
I take it as a compliment that you feel safe enough to bare your soul in my presence. And I think it's really important to understand again that your trauma doesn't have to define you as who you are. It is obviously something that happened to you or that didn't happen for you, but
Mhm.
that's really different than it being a definition of who you are. And so the more courage that you can have to really tell yourself the truth about where you come from and to let the people that have harmed you be responsible for what they've done or not done for you, can be really, really relieving to people. And it's not about blaming people, it's letting the responsibility go where it lies. I think it's important to blame people who hurt other people on purpose,
Mm.
right? I mean, that's why we have jails to put people in who do, who cause harm on purpose.
Mhm.
But if it's something that happens by accident or out of ignorance or whatever it might be, then all that's required is the perpetrator to make restitution,
Mm.
to take responsibility and be sorry and do the best they can to make amends.
Mm.
Because a lot of people, again, say to me, parents, what do I do to help my kids? And usually I say to them, well, it's probably not a good idea to give them a ton of money, especially if they have a substance problem or whatever it might be. But certainly tell them that you'll pay for all the help they need to get. Because I think as parents, it's our responsibility to make sure our kids are okay to the best of our ability. And so again, another self-serving statement, but those people they don't have to come to me. They can go to anybody to get help.
I agree, and they don't often a lot of people don't realize that their problems are emotional because I know so many parents who, yeah, they'll, "What do you need? I've got you,"
Right, right,
but they don't mean a shoulder to cry on or somebody
right,
to talk to. Anything non-emotional, like, "Do you need groceries?"
right, right.
Pick up the
Yes,
kids
I
from
can't give you
school.
my heart, but I'll give you some money.
Yep, yep, that's a really common trap.
Yeah. Is it okay if I say a few more things, Savannah?
Absolutely.
Um, People often say that they can't afford therapy. And I do agree that most people could probably not afford to come and see me because I live in such a wealthy community and the cost of living is so high here that everything is artificially inflated in a way that I think is obscene. But every therapist needs to go through training. And training, uh, therapists in training usually see people for whatever they can afford or nothing.
Mm.
And there are many opportunities to see really good therapists in training for whatever the person can afford. All you got to do is get a hold of the psychological association in your community and ask them where the low cost counseling centers are that they could um, get some help from. Because one of the things I like to do is help people become therapists that I think are really capable. And some of those people are not quite licensed yet, but they're in some ways way better than somebody who's been in business for 20 or 30 years. And so I've been able to help people that couldn't afford me to get the kind of therapy that they need through training institutes. So I know it sounds a little bit scary to see somebody who's not been in practice forever, but um, what makes a good therapist in my mind is something that you're kind of born with. And that really what your training does is help you understand that you already know what you're doing and what you're capable of. So try not to use money as an excuse about why you can't get the help you need.
Absolutely.
So I think that's important. I try to help people understand that please don't claim poverty as an excuse. I understand not having money is a problem, but that doesn't mean you can't get help.
Yeah, there's always resources out there and people who want to help.
Yeah. I mean, weirdly enough, in Santa Barbara, there's like four or five therapy schools. And for a small town like this, it's pretty amazing how many people are training to become therapists. You'd be stunned. But it just happens to be one of those kind of places.
Seek and you shall find, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
You just gotta keep.
Um, yeah. The other thing I think that I try to help people that really helps people heal is learning how to trust their intuition. I think that it's a very sacred part of who we are, our intuition. And it's hard sometimes for people to trust what they know because they have no proof other than what it feels like.
Mm.
And so part of what and especially when you're doing hypnosis, to let yourself really trust the feelings that come up and understand that those feelings, you can't invent your feelings. right? I don't know anybody who can sort of control how they feel.
Mm.
You can control what you do about how you feel, but mostly the feelings are real, and what you decide to do with them is really what your brain is for. Um, so I'm a little bit biased in that regard. I think our brains were given to us to decide what to do about how we feel instead of the other way around.
Absolutely.
So I think those are the things I consider to be really important. And it does take courage. I'm not trying to make it seem simple, just go do it, because you're not going to cry harder in the face of healing trauma in any other context except maybe losing somebody you love,
Mhm.
because that's all just part of the deal. And yeah, it's scary to let yourself go into the deep pain, but it's also so relieving if you allow yourself to go there. So
It's
it
worth it
takes
all
a
the
lot of
time.
courage. I think it's worth it, but I can talk about all the things that happened to me and didn't happen for me, and there's no emotional charge anymore. But
Right.
that's because I spent years coming to terms with it.
Yeah. Because that's what you have to do. You have to get comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think that therapy is a science. I think it's an art.
Yes. I agree completely.
And I think a lot of the wanting to make it evidence based and like a cookbook that you apply to somebody's life, I think it causes actually more damage than good.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think most of the techniques and most of the cookbooks are designed to help therapists feel comfortable in the face of really uncomfortable situations. How's that going to help your client
Mm-hmm.
if you provide them a recipe and they don't follow the recipe and it doesn't help? Then you can just blame your client for not getting, in quotes, better.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure whoever you see, if you decide to see a therapist, it's okay to ask them how much therapy they've had themselves. Because if they say maybe a little bit, then you're in the wrong place.
I agree because we all have things to work on.
Yeah. And I remember when I finally had the memories of being sexually abused, how many people, because I'd been in business for about 5 or 6 years before then, how many people I overlooked symptoms that they were showing me about the possibility that they could have been sexually abused that I couldn't see because I didn't come to terms with my own trauma. And I had no idea that I was blind.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that's important, is to make sure that whoever you see has enough experience that uh, they're not going to miss something that's really important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
No, you're very kind. I mean, I really appreciate it. Is it okay if I talk a bit about my podcast before we go?
Please do. I was going to ask.
Okay. Um, I started a podcast a couple of years ago because I have a really strong need to help people. And right now I'm only seeing about 20 people a week in my practice, and I don't want to work any harder than that on an individual level. So I decided to do a podcast for a couple of reasons. One, because I wanted to, as I talked about before, show that old guys can actually talk about things that are meaningful and important. We're not all sort of, shut down. And the podcast is called Fear Me Out. It's kind of a play on words. And about, I've put out about 110 episodes. I would say probably 90 of those episodes are trauma survivors coming and talking about what their journey has been to healing. They're incredibly inspirational. It's been an amazing experience to interview people who are willing to be candid about what it has taken them to get to a place of healing. The other podcasts have been mostly me interviewing professional people that I admire, so that the public can have an understanding of what it takes to find a really good therapist and what those people sound like when they're talking about who they are, whether it's a psychiatrist or an acupuncturist or a therapist or whatever, whoever the person may be. I want people to know that what a good practitioner sounds like. So if people want to come and find my podcast, they can go to my website, which is danasaperstein.com or fearmeoutpodcast.com on my website. I just did a whole series on how to thrive as a highly sensitive person,
Hmm.
uh, because being a really high sensitive person is a very unique sort of quality that about 15% of the population has, but it's a very meaningful trait in terms of seeing the world in a very different way.
Awesome.
Before that, I did a few episodes on anti-Semitism because it's such a huge uh, part of our. I mean, I was brought up Jewish. I don't practice my religion, but I'm certainly, my last name identifies me pretty clearly as a Jewish person in most circles. So I just want people to know how much suffering there is uh, that is not really expected. Just, I mean, I don't know why people hate me because I'm Jewish. I didn't do anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
But it's certainly part of the world. Um, I did an episode where I interviewed my wife, who was a hospice nurse for 30 years, to talk about the fear of death and how she helped people die when she was working. So there's all kinds of different subjects that come up and that I think are important for people to sort of hear about.
Yeah, real world things that people need to stop turning a blind eye to and pretending don't
Yes,
exist.
absolutely. And I really appreciate you for having me on your podcast. It's really fun for me. Uh, um, it's a good way to spend time.
I agree. That's why I do it too, is because I enjoy it. I enjoy having real conversations instead
Oh,
of,
absolutely.
talking about the weather, which is fine. Our weather's interesting lately.
Well, and you know, Savannah, the cool thing about doing a podcast and being on other people's podcasts is that I never in my life have imagined I would meet a lovely woman like yourself in Alabama.
Yeah, all
I've
around.
never talked to anybody in Alabama before. It's, you know, it's such a lovely thing to know that because of my ignorance in, you know, different parts of the United States, that there are people much like yourself who are trying really hard to be of service. And it feels really good to me.
Thank you. It was good to meet you too and have this conversation.
So thank you.
Yeah. And I'll make sure that we link all of those really close by so nobody has to go searching too hard for them. We have all of the resources if you're hoping to heal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So nice to meet you.